Welcome to the Enlightenment Evolution Hour. I am your host, Rob Gauthier, the ET Whisperer. The Enlightenment Evolution Hour is a part of the Enlightenment Evolution Network. Any ideas expressed by the guest, myself, or commenters may not necessarily reflect the same opinions of the Enlightenment Evolution Network. Enlightenment defined. It is the state of giving or receiving greater knowledge and understanding about a certain subject or situation. Evolution defined. The gradual development of something, especially from a simple to more complex form. So what is Enlightenment evolution? The state of giving and receiving greater knowledge as we develop from a simple to more complex human being living on Earth for our soul's experience. Welcome now and join us as we explore our Enlightenment Evolution Hour together. The Enlightenment Evolution Hour is simulcast live every Wednesday at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific from the Enlightenment Evolution Hour page, Matrix Minds Facebook page, and the ET Whisper YouTube channel. It is also redistributed from the Forbidden Knowledge News Network and Conscious Awakening Network. Hey everybody, welcome to the Enlightenment Evolution Hour. I'm your host, Rob Goth here. We have an amazing guest who's come back and blessed our presence with a second appearance, and we have a little surprise on top of that for you guys. But before we get to that, I want to say this is the version of past Rob speaking to the future version of all of you guys going through time with this broadcast. And we have some live people here from the Matrix Minds and all of our brainiacs over there. Hi, guys. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. Just like the David Chase video that you'll see next week, this one specifically is a pre-recorded because I will be in Sedona. By the time you're hearing my voice, I'm going to be out in the desert playing with the ETs, hanging out in the desert, having a great time with everybody over there. But for those of you who are with us live, welcome, Matrix Minds folks. Enjoy. And for those of you in the future, I love you guys. Thank you for showing up. So what we do every week, we do a quick announcements, and then we get to our guests. So the announcements for this week is simple. That next week, you'll see David Chase on a pre-record. I will be home to Michigan by then, but I need a couple days to settle back in. So you'll be seeing that next week. The week before is something that's in my future, Art Geisman, who I'm going to be actually doing my live event with tonight, live broadcast there. And then in the next couple weeks, we'll announce as we go network announcements for the Enlightenment Evolution Network. We do have Out There Talk with Valiant himself, the head singer of Valiant Thor, famous for the game Guitar Hero 2, the song Pangea. They have a show, or he, the head singer, has his own show on our network called Out There Talk. And basically, this is a Instagram live, so you can go and catch that every, I believe it is Tuesday and Wednesday, or Wednesday and Thursday, forgive me, on his page on Instagram, and he is back and in full swing. So go check that out. It's 11:59 Eastern, 8:59 Pacific. And for the ET Whisper, there are no new announcements. Sedona, I'll already be there by the time you guys hear this. And I'll be at the Conscious Life Expo in Los Angeles in February. But me and Kalina have been talking to other channelers, and we have a channel panel cooking in the mix. A live one we'll probably be doing in Arizona, and probably going to be January of 2025. So the very first week of January 2025, we might be with some of the best-known channelers in the world doing our thing with them over there. So keep an eye out. Announcements will come. We've already got a couple people who are locked in and said, yes, they're coming. Big names. One of them we've not had before. So keep an eye out for that. And let's talk about our guest. Our guest is CM Kosemen, and he is an amazing guy who came over and did a previous show with us. So a lot of times when we're talking about story and things of that nature, I'll have you refer back to this. We're going to just jump in and start talking, but I want to tell you a little bit about him in case you missed the first episode. CM Kosemen is an artist and an independent researcher born in Ankara, Turkey in 1984. He studied at Cornell University, Istanbul's Sabak. Oh my word! You'll have to fill in the words on these. But he went to a university there and holds a master's degree from London Goldsmiths College in documentary film and media studies. His areas of interest include surreal art, which he is amazing at, which we'll definitely be talking about, Mediterranean history, paleontology, evolution, zoology, and visual culture. Kosemen's surreal art has been displayed in exhibits in Cantina, maybe Vienna. Oh my word, I'm so horrible at this. Istanbul, Ankara, London, Tel Aviv, and multiple other places. He also wrote the book All Tomorrows, which we talked about extensively in our last show. But instead of just doing what I normally do and have all of you guys hear from me, I'm going to bring in this amazing dude, and he can talk about this for himself. Welcome, Mr. Kosemen. How are you?
Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Rob. And thanks to everyone making the Enlightenment Evolution Hour possible over at the Nerd Network and behind the scenes. And hello, and thanks to everyone from the past, future, this time, and beyond. I'm really honored to be in your company. And thank you for this amazing introduction as well. It made me feel a bit bashful. I've just been lucky with my time. I'm mostly dealing with the hustle and grist of life, like everybody else. In between the pages, I'm lucky enough to have some time on my own to paint and do stuff. So here we are, and well, I'm all open for your questions and guidance. And also, it's a special honor to be here for a second time. I mean, I've been following your channel on YouTube particularly, and like your the community you have built in the world and in the, let us say, worlds between the worlds, it's really unique. And like each time I listen to your content, I feel very charmed and happy, and it's very rare that someone can reach across worlds, space, and time, and the result is so wholesome and comforting. And each time I listen to your work, i come off I come across with that feeling. So in that respect also, you have my admiration and respect, let us say.
Now you're making me blush and bashful. Thank you for that. That's beautiful, brother. I really do appreciate that. And I was aware that you had been following some of what we're doing here, but I didn't realize that it was so great for you. I appreciate that. Our community is a pretty great one, and I really love how these energies come together for a moment like this.
Mhm.
So we've got you. Last time we talked about your past and your history and what created the excitement to write the book. But let's go outside of the book. That book is one that I know is focused on you, but it's just a very small microcosm of the greater body of work that you do.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit with us about like going to get your degree and how that led to the interest to doing some of your art and some of your um oh my word, I'm losing the name for it, the theoretic evolution work that you've done.
Certainly, certainly. I mean, I think I've been blessed or cursed with knowing what I wanted to do since I was an infant. I think I always wanted to see, draw, or in other ways create or manifest strange creatures that are not human. So this was my baseline. I've enjoyed it ever since I knew myself, let us say. And then as a kid growing up, I found this in all expressions of popular culture I encountered, such as cartoons about dinosaurs, especially Jurassic Park in 1993 was a big catalyst. And of course, then I also kind of started to educate myself in the actual science of these things, like natural history of vertebrate evolution, let us say. And in tandem with these, I was lucky enough to apply for higher education, and my family at the time had the means to support me through college. So I was actually accepted by Cornell University, which is like a nice US college. And there I was planning to pursue filmmaking and zoology as double majors because I wanted to learn about animals, and maybe by that time my interest in strange creatures had turned into an interest in telling stories. And this way I studied for a couple of years. Actually, coincidentally, this was the time I started writing All Tomorrows, which is the online free ebook about grotesque future human evolution that many people know me by. Then, after 2 years in Cornell University, I felt homesick and I transferred to what what amounts to an American college in Turkey, Sabancı University, and there I completed my degree in, I mean, filmmaking kind of turned into design, and so I had a double degree in art and design from there, and that's how I did my BA. So I was completely equipped for a life in the arts and the advertising world. And then I, without stopping, I also did a year of master studies. So then I came back home, you know, a freshly minted, somewhat overeducated guy. I launched myself into the advertising world, which is like it. I mean, one can be cynical about it. You know, you could say the usual bits that it's all about madman and cynical and stale. Plus, there are added depths of character, and not in a good way, like added cringeworthy elements of maybe doing this in a non-Western culture. Yeah, let me just suffice it to say, and there are some really interesting and colorful people in that crowd, the sort of Turkish advertisers who want to become like Don Draper and stuff like that. But instead of being cynical, I actually learned a lot there. You know, even I think, I mean, that advertising career convinced me that I think even like the worst person has something interesting to teach you and something important to teach you, even as a warning or a foil. But more often than not, like, you know, in that life, for example, I learned brevity, the importance of brevity. When you want to say something, you know, it especially was an issue with me that, you know, being somewhat prone to storytelling, you tell everything. But in fact, actually, you have to like assess who you're talking to and just at the same time cut corners, but also at the same time convey just the right depth of detail. So in that advertising life, I learned the ability to talk about anything, even like the most esoteric or weird subjects, in a way that I call this the aunt test. Like my aunt could understand, you know. So if your aunt and uncle can understand what you're up to, then you're a good communicator. After so there, like in tandem, like when all of these was these things were happening, I always aimed to like preserve some of my time for my own studies, subjects, art and painting or writing. And like, long story short, I came away. I've been working professionally. I'm still actually working as an advertiser and a copywriter, by the way, for PR companies in Turkey mostly.
So that's your
And
daytime job then.
that's what brings home the bacon mostly. Although in the past 2 years, my YouTube channel also has become like a vital crutch. It's moved away from being a windfall, and like these days it started being like kind of like one of the staples of my income. So, and I have like 40,000 very interesting, quirky subscribers on YouTube. And over at my channel, I mean, I do like real life research about extraordinary subjects. And so, for example, my latest videos, one of them was about miniature budgie UAPs or UFOs, which is actually a form of ball lightning. But interestingly, there are reports from England and the UK, from the US, sorry, of literally budgie sized ball lightning exploding into existence. And like in one of these accounts, the ball lightning literally plays with a woman's tiny finger. And like in another account from the US, from the UK, the ball lightning runs on the table like a little budgie running on a breakfast table. So I talk about things like that in a unique and sometimes humorous perspective. So also that's my YouTube channel. Now, when all of these were happening, I was always I wonder if the camera can see this, but I'm always interested in like spontaneous drawings of strange creatures, spirit forms, etc. Like this is a very whimsical example, of course, but right here there's another one which is quite like big and detailed, and I was just painting this earlier today. But like these paintings or drawings, I don't know what they're going to end up as when I'm making them, but I just make them for the joy of making them. And here's one more. Sorry.
I love that you're on camera so you can show us this, because your art's always been beautiful, and the way I tried to share it last time, it wasn't so clear.
Thank you. Well, these just keep coming, and they are inspired by my own treks in nature, also the folklore and folk art of let's say Anatolia and surrounding Mediterranean countries. And I just do these. They're just so much fun. Now they're a break from my other art, which was always more like, I don't have any of those I can flash across the screen at the moment, but I also specialized in so in the time I managed to buy myself from my college studies and then from my day job, basically, I also make realistic depictions of animals, evolution, and dinosaurs and prehistoric life. And usually these are very technical. I mean, I have drawings where I look at skulls of dinosaurs. In fact, just a second. No, it's too far away to reach. Apologies. But like, I I make drawings of dinosaur skulls, and imagine what flesh may have looked like on them. And this whole like cottage industry of reconstructing dinosaurs, it's a very lively scene. There are lots of debates, lots of new evidence coming into light every day. So for example, if you look at the long-necked dinosaurs like brachiosaurus and stuff, they actually have extremely strange skulls because the nostrils are actually way over at the top of the head. They used to think this was because they were swimming and then they were like huge aquatic animals. But now actually we know that most of these animals actually lived on land. So what was the nostril doing there? Now, some people suggest it was connected to something like a trunk. So imagine a long-necked dinosaur with a even elephant or reptile-like trunk. That would be a stranger creature. Or maybe it was connected to something like a balloon that inflated and it helped it make noises, etc. Nobody really knows. That's why, as a scientific artist, you can still afford to indulge in fantasy for that respect, in that respect, for example. So I was doing lots of like realistic, anatomically rigorous artworks like that when in 2010 I met Mr. Kerim Can, who like probably would not be familiar in this scene. He's a local gallerist and a curator. And he just told me that, I went to him saying like, I want to sell my artwork at my drawings at your gallery, my dinosaur art and stuff. And he just told me you should get like a big sheet of paper, just some like raw paint from not even the art supply store, but like from from the hardware store. Actually, also it's my recommendation to all artists listening that the hardware store is your best friend, really, especially if you get like red, blue, and yellow acrylics, and maybe white and black. You don't need anything else. You can make any color you want, and like just big brushes like this. And you can also go to, I mean, I drove over to a paper mill and basically asked for their damaged stock. And literally for something like $10, I had like 100 kilograms of paper in my trunk. So I drove
Whoa.
over. Yeah, yeah. And I think in the US, the opportunities are even greater. You just need to just ask around, drive around. You'd be surprised what you find. Like, so I went and I just started painting. Like, so the results were like creatures, a bit like these guys, maybe, but like they were like 6 feet tall each on big rolls of paper, or maybe something like this, but on a piece of paper. Let me think, in like 4 feet by 12 feet or something. So it was really nice. So that's how I started painting. My first paintings were a bit crude and cave painting like. They still are that way. So the trick is to level up in your skills without making it obvious you're an amateur. So I think, like, to my credit, one of the few things I'm good at is like I know what I can or can't do. So I use those limitations and abilities. I pick and choose. And once again, because this is like a land of pure fantasy, it doesn't matter. There's no mistake if this creature has 4 arms, or if this thing is like a snake, or if it's like a scorpion. There are no mistakes. So the trick is to have fun, create something I never made before, and also, um, I think it was a Brancusi, who is like a sculptor, a Romanian sculptor, very famous back in the day. And he said, I have only joy to give you. Do not look too deeply for hidden messages or mysteries. So that was always my guiding credo in making these artworks. I don't try to make them look like anything else. They come straight from the tap onto paper, straight from the mind. Obviously, as time passes and I look at my paintings from 6 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 1 year ago, or paintings that I created during times of jubilation or stress, I always notice that something filters through. So you can never be devoid of meaning and metaphor. But I think the trick is not to force it, and just let it flow. And like, a few of these are personal, but there have been a couple of cases where the coincidences were like really interesting, to say the least. There have been patterns where, like, not literal patterns, but there have been cases where I painted something and then something like it came true in a way, or it's like seeing shapes in clouds, or as they do in this part of the world, trying to read somebody's future from a coffee cup. They do that over here.
Yeah, we see a lot of the old school Chinese tea leaf thing, which was similar. So let me ask you a question. First of all, I want to comment on something you said a long time ago with your 40,000+ subscribers that are I can't remember how you described them, but I've been in that community too, because I have followed all the live streams of yours that I could catch, and
Yes.
they really are a great crowd. So congratulations for growing that out. And your Patreon is also amazing. You do a lot of work on there too. So if anyone is interested in CM Kosemen's work, I highly suggest the Patreon too. But I want to go back to something you said when you're in this art where you have no hidden agenda. That is
Mhm.
something that a lot of people do when they interpret art. They're like, they see a picture of a doorknob and they're like, oh, they're talking about the meaning of life, and they interpret these really highly weird things from their own perspectives out into others. So it's nice that you said that. But I want to understand too, when you're in that moment of a pure creation and you're having fun, do you ever feel like sometimes you're just not even really present there, that it's just so deep of a connection to that art that it's just coming out of you more than you're doing it? Or does it always feel like there's a purpose and a moment of your own mind really just being creative in that moment, and that's why you enjoy it?
I think it's mostly the former. I mean, when I'm really in the mood, or I'm like, especially using watercolors these days, it feels more like I'm playing an instrument, or it sounds strange, but maybe writing rather than drawing. Like, especially, I mean, let's take this guy, for example, because that's how I like to talk about these things. Like this guy, I like to say he came tonight. So, um, I was just listening to, well, sometimes music is a catalyst, but like these dots and tentacles on the head shape here, they kind of like, for me, it's always like playing an instrument rather than like really like thinking about, oh, how many tentacles am I going to put here, or which shade of color I'm going to pick. It's just like when you're on the fly, it's really like almost like surfing. It feels like a more temporal activity. So in that respect, it's interesting. Also, I remember when before, in the good old days before COVID, when I actually had a big studio outside of home to paint in. I had these, as I told you, like 6 feet tall sheets. And the way you paint on these sheets, I always paint with very like wet media. So even when it's acrylics, it's actually like not out of a tube, but it's like in like sauce like consistency, basically. So the
Oh, I
thing
see.
so the thing drips all over the place. And so for this reason, the paper has to be on the ground, and I had to like crawl like a human spider on it, painting with like basically like three or four of these like sauce containers in one hand, a brush on the other, just like going dip dab dob, dip dab dob, dip dab dob. And it was funny, like in one of those experiences, I also remember my other work is about evolutionary fantasies. So I actually had this like fantasy about a kind of bird that communicates without sound, but basically with patterns. So I imagined maybe in another world, or in another timeline, imagine birds with special glands. Maybe they eat snails or something. So they ground up the snail shells, the calcium, and it comes out as a sort of like special white saliva, maybe the consistency of Tipex. So instead of singing songs, what they do is like they do dob 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 dob, like little dots on a branch. Maybe there's one species that only does lines, maybe another species that only does circles, maybe another species that like it's like the spiral warbler, only draws spirals and stuff like that. So I had that fantasy too when I was doing these big spirit paintings. And in those moments, I think everything I do kind of feels intertwined. I mean, in my mind, I seldom think about like the thing I'm painting. And usually my mind drifts off into flights of fancy, like the painting birds I just described you. And my body just does stuff. And I find this, maybe this is the closest I can get to your art when I'm like drawing these forms. And besides, beyond a very simple background reflex searching for harmony, there's no control. And that's, I think, the magic of it. And that's actually, I think, the advice I could give to any artist who wants to go on a similar path of exploration.
Well, that's kind of why I asked, because when I speak to my own guides and they give information to me about what channeling is.
Hmm.
Well, channeling isn't just communicating verbally with a meditative trance state or just a connection state. Music people channel music. They just let it flow through their soul. It's coming from their higher source
Hmm.
of self, and that just comes through their body. Artists do it, teachers do it. Anyone who's actually doing something that they're truly passionate about and they're
Hmm.
truly in alignment with, that inspiration comes through. And I know sometimes people call it a muse or the spirit of creation or whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it. There is something that's more than you that's involved with it.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, yeah, I really feel at these times that, you know, I mean, it might be a bit cliche, but I feel like sometimes a vessel for these things to come out, and it's a very interesting experience that to say the least.
When you said you're crawling around that 6 foot piece of paper like a spider, I could literally see you just doing that and doing it with such happiness and doing it. Because I watched a bit of that documentary film that the guy did with you, and I'm
Yeah,
forgetting the name now.
Kevin Schreck's Tangent Realms. Yes, yes.
Tangent Realms, that's it. Yeah. And I saw some of your creation style, and I was like, man, he is in a zone right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it was quite something. I mean, I used to joke around to the intense fear of my close family. And sometimes I say, I don't care if I go to jail, I'll just take some paper and pens and just draw, draw, draw. And it will be a kind of like one cot and three hot kind of existence. That's like old British slang for like a cot to sleep on, three hot meals, and bish bash bosh, you're it. Of course, it's something
Yeah, that's a
easier
that's
said than done. But
that
yeah.
that expression is used in America quite a bit too. Three hots and a cot. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's beautiful. So, tell us then about the energy behind the theoretical exploration of evolution, because you did actually some books with some very intensive diagrams
Yeah.
for dinosaurs and paleological. So, talk about the paleological excitements that you had and the education on that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm like, unless you consider the basic zoology classes I took during college, which were, I mean, quite like elementary level stuff, I'm mostly self-taught on anatomy and paleontology. And the name of the genre is, I think, paleo art. And if you go to websites like, I mean, once all of the paleo art world was on this website called DeviantArt, which has since kind of declined in popularity.
I
Now I think
remember that. Yeah.
now I think everybody is on Twitter, or X as they call it these days. But it's an interesting flock of like globally distributed, really smart, interesting, and talented people. And basically, the name of the game in paleo art, the name of the game is to create images and artifacts that get people to think about life in the past. Now, usually, the most like direct way to do this is by actual highly detailed illustrations of these animals. And in order to do that, people study bones and skeletal diagrams. Sometimes they go to museums and take pictures of the mounted skeletons there. And later on, they kind of like drape the flesh around the skeleton and stuff like that. But like some people really take this to a masterful level. Like they study scientific papers. And I have to add here that almost none of these people have like a quote unquote degree in paleo art. Very few of them are actually paleontologists themselves, most of them are just like me. They work day jobs, or they're studying, they're in college, or sometimes high school, and they learned their research online using open access papers and scientific literature. Certainly it's a blessing in that respect. I mean, like somebody living in Turkey or Indonesia, or even like as any small town in the States, you could just access, if you want to find out about basically like what did trees look like when T-Rex was running around, so that the few trees you paint in the background are accurate. Now you can find these materials online. So in that respect, the internet has been a like great democratizing force multiplier, let me just say. Apologies.
Yeah.
All right. And in addition to accurate reconstructions of dinosaurs, another current in paleo art is something which I like to call informed speculation. That is to say, you basically, I mean, as the old adage goes, picture is worth 1,000 words. So sometimes people actually postulate these hypotheses using illustrations rather than writing a big scientific paper about it. For example, the examples can include the skulls of these long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs, which I just described had weird holes on them. So their necks also have like bones with lots of passages for air. So this was like a feature to make them lighter. But all these passages for air also make it possible that these things may have had like air sacs in their necks, a bit like grouses or capercaillies. Sometimes like they do this inflated sac thing, So artists can and have illustrated long-necked plant-eating dinosaurs with like big balloon-like display organs coming out of their necks. And then these ideas have actually been picked up by legitimate researchers and considered quite seriously. But I think like the epitome of that aspect has been in the several cases where paleo artists, usually with no scientific training, have actually predicted scientific discoveries. So they looked at the fossils, they said, if this thing exists, maybe it worked this way or that way. I mean, I'll just give you a brief example. Long before dinosaurs, we have fossil remains of creatures called anomalocarids. And these were like Cambrian era animals. They basically look like bizarre shrimp-like things with like multiple sets of fins that look like dragonfly wings, but they swam underwater, of course. Really bizarre animals, okay?
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it really looks like an alien organism, actually. And one artist with the name John Mezzaros made an illustration saying that, this was his reasoning. We only know a few species of these things, but there probably were lots more, since with fossilization, like 90% of everything gets lost. So everything we know is like probably less than 1% of what was actually alive back in the day. That's really humbling. So
That
this guy,
is, because there's
yeah,
millions of different fossilized things just in each era, I would imagine.
yeah. So, I mean, so this guy took that adage and imagined a version of this Anomalocaris creature with a filter feeding kind of lifestyle. And he imagined, now normally these things have two big front organs by their heads. They kind of work like this. They grab stuff and crunch, 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 eat them. this guy imagined them like really long and frond-like, almost like feathers, and he imagined them like moving about and filtering prey, like filtering smaller creatures. This was a purely imaginary drawing. It was based on real animals, real fossils, but he took a leap of faith. He took a scientific leap of faith. And then a couple of years later, something unnervingly similar to this illustration was discovered. Now, did this artist manifest this fossil into existence? I don't think so. But in my opinion, there are also a few other cases like this, by the way. Like artists make a speculation which comes true. There were actually cases like this way before, like American scientist Beebe, Beebe. His name was William Beebe or Robert Beebe. I forgot which is which. But he postulated a tetrapteryx stage in the evolution of birds. So, like, long story short, we now know that dinosaurs and birds are very closely related. Back in Beebe's day, this was not so well understood, but he said there must be a creature that's like a reptile and jumps from trees, and it has kind of like feathery scales on its arms and legs. So he called this a tetrapteryx. Now, years later, this tetrapteryx hypothesis was in 1925, and he made paintings of it too, by the way. Years later, in 1998 or 2002, I forgot the year now, they discovered a dinosaur called Microraptor, which is, imagine a crow-sized relative of the big raptor dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. And it was all covered in feathers, like a bird. And exactly like Beebe's Tetrapteryx, it had feathers in its arms and legs. So it effectively had 4 legs. So, like,
I remember when that came out, that was huge news to the science community about finding these feathers on these tiny raptor dinosaurs. It was a big thing.
Yeah. It was a real big deal. So I think cases like this really prove to me that science and art and science and even speculation are like these like forcibly separated siblings. And now in our current scientific methodology, the way we understand the universe, we kind of work faster by maybe pigeonholing them or sequestering them. But actually, the really seminal stuff you get when you use them all together. And I think, like, given infinite endowment, I would maybe like open a department like that associated with a school of geological studies or like wherever it is these days that people go to study paleontology. And I would make sure that I would bring these artists and scientists together, and they would just be able to scientifically speculate on possible forms that we might expect to uncover. And if such a department, if somebody ever paid for this, and like, I mean, compared to what some of the other things people pay for, the money involved in such an endeavor would be like minuscule. You're just talking about like a decent human living wage for like 20 people at most, okay? And all these people get to do is they talk about dinosaurs, art, create art about dinosaurs, speculate about dinosaurs, prehistoric life and evolution. And I'm sure like if you had a department like this running for a couple of years, they would start to predict stuff. And it just goes like as a testimony to basically the strength of the human mind to be able to just predict the rhymes in the infinite swan song of the creator or the universe, whatever you would like to call it. And the like secondary or tertiary implications of such a process mind you, are just way more deeper than just some interesting pictures of dinosaurs. So in that respect, even in this like more scientifically accurate form of art, you really do get a taste of something really savory and deep. And just lucky enough to have tasted that and shared that, I guess.
Well, what you do is fascinating, and I agree. I think if they would put a small amount of money to that, we could get lots of great things to come out of that.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I we talked last time we had the show about an artist that you quite loved his work, and that you took illustrations and made your own book with it, David Chase, who will be
Ooh.
a guest next week after yours. And I finally got him to come back on the show after many years of him not doing interviews. But uh, he said that he had a very similar path, that he went to college because he loved the idea of dinosaurs and wanted to understand their evolution better. And he said eventually he stopped because he saw that the people who were out there were doing a better job than he could, and he didn't feel like he could contribute to it as much as what the people were contributing, which I found very interesting, being a fact that he's a lover of reptiles and reptilian animals in general. So I think you'll find some of that fascinating. I believe that you're right, though. I think the understanding of um, the possibility of evolution, or just constructing that between people who really understand um, the structures of the bones, the fossils and remains that they found, but also understanding a wider ecology of multiple ecosystems and animals that have come to Earth in its creation. I think that would be a beautiful combination and a beautiful outcome for that. What about you? What do you think if they ever did a system like that and started hiring people, would you put in your application?
Oh, sure. I've put in like first step first apply. I would be one of the first people to apply. By the way, parenthesis there. My great respect to Mr. Chase. I'm an enormous fan of his work. Actually, I have printed his book, Guide to Alien Beings. I actually like took it to like local printers and had it bound for myself. It's one of the most prized possessions in my library, and I really respect the way he is approaching this deep body of contactee accounts. And even though, like some would say, what he's doing is like extremely Fortean, he actually has a very scientific approach to his work. Like every detail in these eyewitness drawings is like solidly referenced. I'm certain like even like the shape of the eyebrows of the entities these people saw, he must have asked them like consecutive times, what did it look like? So he's just doing like, so he's applying the scientific mindset to something that's truly extraordinary. And like he is one of my artistic idols, so it's good to be like one point of connection away from such a valuable master artist that I look up to. So they're my kindest regards.
I did play him the clip for not on the show, but many months before he agreed to come back on. I played him the clip and I gave him the time where me and you had talked about him, and he was
Mhm.
very honored that you thought that highly of his work too, because he does. And it's funny you bring that up, his scientific method behind that, because we talked about that quite a bit on the show too.
Mhm.
And I did end up sending that to your Facebook page and sent you a friend request over there too. So now you'll have access to that interview even before our YouTube people do. Sorry,
Lovely.
guys. If you were on Facebook, you would have already seen it, guys, but no worries. Uh, that I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think both of you would have a lot of commonality and a lot of good communication points, because both of you are extremely similar in the desire to have a scientific understanding, as well as being available and open to the possibilities of magic that the rest of science doesn't want to even bother looking at. But
Mhm.
that brings me to my next topic. now science is starting to open up. We just had a UFO conference in Mexico yesterday where they brought out what is said to be a remains of an extraterrestrial being that's over 1,000, maybe 1,000 years old or more. So tell me what you think about this UFO disclosure, because I know this is a topic of interest for you. You know, UFOs and occupants of craft, ETs. So what do you think that this is?
Well, the Mexico entity, I looked at the images they released of it. I don't know why one of the images they used was like clearly generated in one of those AI programs. So that was a bit
Yeah.
suspicious. When they showed the internal skeletons, I had two thoughts. In some contactee accounts, you have these mentions of the gray aliens or the reticulans or whatever they call them, the smaller, the more hostile looking creatures. And there's like a clear current of these creatures being not real creatures, but somehow like biotic robots almost that are almost created to look like humans, just enough to mimic them. And the internal skeleton they present in those images in the Mexico September 2023 disclosure, they really look like not a creature. They really look like some basic biological crude drone robot entity. So when I first saw that, I was really like, the crudeness of the thing actually really scared me, because in that respect it really meshed with that account, that detail in many accounts. So in that respect I was a bit impressed. But then I looked closely at the x-rays they presented, and in one of the creature's hands it's just human metacarpals, which are like these bones at the back of your palm. I mean, it's just so couple of metacarpals just strung together. And I mean, let us not be extremely skeptical, but if these things are real, they might be these biological robots. But it's really curious that these biological robots have these like crude bone systems, but just as you reach their hands, they have these digits that look exactly like human metacarpal bones. And I mean, I'll just leave it out there that, in my humble personal opinion, there's a likelihood that this Mexican thing might be a forgery. I think the US Senate discussions that took place earlier, which was July, August 2020, there's something more, some more food for thought there. But once again, I have no doubt that the US government has spent considerable sums of money looking at these things. I actually personally have no doubt that the UAPs they are seeing on these sensors are real. But I might come across as a more materialistic opinion than many people with this channel, associated or listening to this channel. So apologies in advance. I'm not passing this as a harsh judgment, and I would always be happy to be proven wrong. But it seems to me that these like moving balls of light, which airplanes have chased for since they were airplanes, basically, they really do represent an unknown phenomenon that probably might have extraordinary implications. But I'm not really sure if any physical humanoid creatures are riding this craft or if the government has them in possessions. This is not to say that any entities that people are encountering are, like, in my opinion, they're not false either. It's just that these floating UAPs, they probably represent a physical phenomenon which we don't even have the theory to understand. And they might be something as quote unquote simple as ball lightning, or they might be things like eddies in space-time. They might even be these entities themselves. And one of my, like, let us say, one of the evolutionary fantasies which have lived rent-free in my head for the longest is the possibility, let me say, that these things might represent a total entity. So it has a full spectrum presence. The thing which people see as the UAP or the UFO, it's probably four-dimensional. So it can do these like right angle turns three times the speed of sound. If you got close to this thing enough, it can actually produce these quote unquote humanoid entities with maybe some with the same desire to contact as, like in zoos, for example, we have these puppets we used to feed endangered birds with, so they're not afraid, fear not, let me say. So maybe, of course, extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and I'll also add the caveat that uh, complete denial also needs extraordinary evidence, and we have neither at the point. But it's just food for thought to imagine the UFO phenomenon as maybe manifestations of these quote unquote total entities who, like, if you cut them open and like look them up, they would mimic cells in a weird way. But they're not that, you know. Like, you zoom out, they're a gleam of light in the horizon. You come closer, they can actually produce these entities to talk to you, to interact with you. Maybe they can even like project these into people's minds. Remember, this is the concept of the total entity. So this thing would have full spectrum dominance, which might include the mental theater as well. And once again, if you saw this thing as a physical thing, like if you put it under an electron microscope, maybe it would mimic genes just to trick you. But if you just let it loose, it would just go, disappear like mana or ectoplasm. Something like this I find really difficult to shake off, even with my quote unquote scientific training and skeptical outlook on things. But I think, like, in that respect, I think the more outlandish, quote unquote, these witness statements get, in some strange way, the closer we get to the truth. Because, I mean, let me just go on record and say that it would be very improbable to have like actual spacemen go into an actual vehicle held together by nuts and bolts. It takes off, they go up, off they come, as out of a like something out of a bus or a metro. But we now know the scales in the galaxy just don't work this way, you know. So it might be, once again, a total entity coming from beyond in a way we can barely grasp, and you can never completely rule this out.
I actually love that philosophy, and I think with this community here, it comes in two patterns. We have people who are willing to listen to any idea and buy into that idea quite deeply and say, oh, you know, hey, they're showing us this mummified being. It's got to be a real ET. And then you have other ones who are able to believe in channeling and able to believe in ETs, but anything the government tells them, they'll refuse to listen to. They're like, nope, they've lied to us once, they'll lie to us always. There's very few that are in the middle of that. And I find myself to be in the middle of that too. But I, like you, also want to know that we've got to have some kind of evidence with it, not just the assumptions. And that's hard because when you're dealing with beings who can go traverse, even a few even if our closest neighbor 2 light years over came to Earth, they're not working with the same technology we have unless they're willing to sacrifice dozens of generations on the way to us. And that's not what we're seeing here, right? We're seeing beings that can go in and out of our atmosphere in a matter of seconds. So we have to be able to do it with some type of a balanced approach. But that larger whole entity that you shared, that's a brilliantly unique perspective, and also resonates with me on a high level. For some reason, it just feels like that could very easily be a part of existence. And as strange of things as I've seen in my own deep forms of meditation and channeling, I can't always tell people, yeah, that's 1,000%, 100% verifiable real. I know that it's 100% what I saw and what I felt and what I experienced. And the same with the beings I channel. Yes, I believe that they're a being that lives outside of this earth. And yes, I believe that my experience is real. But I would never, never tell someone else, hey, just believe what I'm telling you. Because that is something we have to do to grow as a society. We have to pressure test everything in order to find out what's actually happening there or not. So what do you think? What do you think that this leads to? You heard that when you said too. I want to mention this. Sorry. When you said too that this could be a robotic being, like a biological robotic being, that actually made a lot of sense to me, because we heard the story from the Russian military men who said that these 5 beings got out of a ship that they just shot down, came together, turned into a ball of light, and flew out. And it turned some of these people that were there, most of them, to stone. And what that made me think of was that if they're able to merge their bodies together like that and shoot out like that, this could very well be some high level technology that they've integrated either some of their consciousness in, or how they evolved through a technological body, like a non-biological entity or artificial intelligence at the high scale. What do you think of that? Did you hear that story about the Russian soldiers, and what did you think about it?
No, I actually haven't heard of it. But now that you told it, once again, like rationally thinking, one thinks that if they really wanted to fake this, they would say something like they've recovered aliens and the bodies have been burned or something. Like if a government official wanted to concoct a lie. And also, as a caveat, I think these days there are a lot of reasons for every government to concoct every sort of lies, by the way.
Yes.
But you would not make up something like this, 2 beings merging into each other. And like, it's just like, I had not heard of this thing before, but it does feel like, once again, something similar to this total entity concept that I've been. I mean, in my understanding, if something like this was the case, we would not even be talking about technology. I mean, it could be something made out of an exotic form of matter, or some other form of like arrangement of some subatomic particles. I think once again the greatest parallelism comes from science fiction literature. And actually a ex-Warsaw Pact country author as well, Stanislav Lem, in his book Solaris, he has this planet which is covered by this ocean, but the ocean is actually not an ocean. There are clouds over the ocean, but they are actually these mimic things that the ocean creates. The ocean actually also creates like fake spaceships, because when people come with a real spaceship, the ocean makes almost like a mirror image spaceship. The ocean also creates a floating human head that's like 100 kilometers wide or something. So at the end, the ocean ends up creating the simulacra of people that the human beings on that planet have in their minds, like this guy's ex-wife gets manifested or something. And in the book Solaris, it turns out that the ocean, it takes them the entire book to realize that the ocean is the being, and it's a form of exotic matter that's sentient, and it can just manifest all these things, but it's just not very good at understanding humans. So all the manifestations come out somehow uncanny and like scary. They help drive the plot along. But really, something like, let us call this the Solaris hypothesis, right? Something like this, the Solaris hypothesis, you know, if all these government claims, these Mexican, strangely X-rayed Mexican robots, or this Russian merging entity, if we take them as fact, then something like this Solaris hypothesis is probably the only workable hypothesis to get around it, to like factor them into our understanding of reality. Because otherwise you have like half a dozen races, like one makes the robots, but no, the others are the merging ones. No, the other ones are actually the Pleiadians. No, the other ones are the praying mantis. So then it becomes, but what if we're dealing with this one entity, perhaps maybe something even angelic or demonic? It's just like a sea of being, and these are just the pseudopods it's sending out to get in touch with us. It's certainly food for thought.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea, and it actually makes sense on a large scale, on a lot of these weird things that have come out and come up. Yeah, I mean, I might be missing quite a bit of the the story with the Russian soldier thing, but basically, I believe it was part of the U.S. congressional thing that was
Hmm.
found through the KGB files
Hmm.
once Russia became Sovieted. Um, or disassociated from that and became a confederation.
Hmm.
And that information was quite crazy to hear too. But yeah, to hear the government say that they had come into contact with biological entities, I think maybe this thing from Mexico was to help push the American government to do the same. Like, hey, you said you got biologicals, why aren't you showing it to us?
Hmm.
Type of
Hmm.
thing. And maybe that's not the direct cause or the direct desire of it, but it's definitely in an energetic way. It seems very likely, like, hey, we're showing ours. Let's see you show yours and see
Show
how
me
that goes
yours,
on.
I'll show you mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the energy with all of this has led us up to a strange new reality. People are opening up to these things now more than ever. Have you noticed that in Turkey? I know Turkey is very different um, in a lot of ways than the U.S. is, but it's also very similar in a lot of ways.
You'd
So
be
can you
surprised
share?
at how similar it is. Yes. Well, I think in Turkey, the heyday of the UFO phenomenon was closer to the 1990s, and it was precipitated by several cultural events. One was the release of films in previous decades, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and then also Independence Day. That was like a big film, big cultural event in Turkey. And like, I think it's the I, I went to see it in theaters in 1995, and people were standing up and applauding at the end.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, it was really interesting. I think it was like the sort of last sweet moment when many people in Turkey had overwhelmingly a positive view of the United States. And like, now you would not like, Turkey still doesn't have as much anti-American sentiment as some other countries out there, but now you would be hard pressed to like find any moment in which like hundreds of people stand up and like clap the US president for his 4th of July speech. So that was like a cultural threshold moment where in the 1990s, also with the rise in popularity of TV shows like the X-Files, the whole part of the world in Europe as well, there was a sort of collective interest in the paranormal and the Fortean, let us say. And in Turkey, there was this big interest in UFOs and aliens back then. And this was when actually some of the like keystone organizations in the country, like the Sirius Center of UFO Research, these are a very eccentric guys. I remember we're still talking about the late 1990s and early 2000s. They had a UFO museum, which was actually a converted flat in a old dilapidated part of town. And basically the living room, they had like panels in it with like basically everything you know about the stock UFO folklore printed out on walls in like glossy sheets. And you went through the corridor with across these panels, so like the living room was formed into like one gut like corridor with these panels, so it was like much bigger on the inside. So you saw all these things, and then you came to the bathroom of the apartment, and in the bathtub was this like green I don't know, was it glow stick juice or something, and they had UV lights, so the whole thing glowed. And in it was this mannequin, literal store mannequin, with like badly glued on head of a gray alien just laying in the green glowing goo. And like as a teenager, many of my visits to that place were like basically on like let's say for dates, to be alone with some like it was like the thrill ride in a carnival almost. So in that respect, like the UFO museum has a special place in my heart. But also many people were interested in it. Now, for example, the UFO organization is still it is still active, but I think people's understanding of the phenomenon has changed a bit. For example, one of the most popular authors of that time was a lady named Farah Yurdözü, and maybe she's watching. So if you're watching, Miss Yurdözü, my respect. She wrote many books about UFOs and also translated a lot of books too into Turkish. But now, for example, she's out there on Instagram and YouTube. Now her activities are more about like touring these ancient sites in Turkey, and she seems to be like her outlook seems to have changed from like searching from aliens, where it used to be like an actual UFO search, an actual search for alien entities. Now she seems to be more into like spiritual channeling and like geoenergetics and like the whole spirit of a place and everything. So her literary output has changed in that respect. She remains, as ever, a very interesting and erudite and talented person, of course. But I think her change also reflects the change in the overall sentiment in Turkey about this massive global phenomenon. But of course, once again, with the rise of the internet and the omniscience of UFOs, you also have like a newfangled Gen Z interest in UAPs and Senate disclosures and alien encounters and all that. But in a weird way, this like new Gen Z interest in YouTube is strangely disconnected from like the Gen X or millennial interest in, well, in people like myself or Farah Yurdözü, and there's some other people like the guys running the Sirius Center of UFO Studies and whatever. There's a wall between those generations, and like I speak to some younger people. Do you know that this book was written? I go, what? They're like staring at it. They don't know, but if they only knew, there used to be this huge two enormous magazines, extremely popular. One of them was called Phenomen, which means phenomenon, was a more like Western leaning and like more secular publication. They would translate articles from Fate magazine, for example. Then there was another magazine called Bilinmeyen, which actually ran for much longer. And it was like a genuine gathering place for true eccentrics. Like every week there would be a male section, and every issue there would be this one particular crank. I must admit that he would say, "Did you know that by attaching a tiny tool to the back of your TV, you can speak to the dead?" And like this magazine was also a community. It had these mail boards, and these were all print mail boards, by the way. So like there would be responses to letters, all printed, circulated. It was a wonderful like pre-internet world.
That
And
sounds amazing.
yeah. So there would be people like these genuine cranks, in my humble opinion. But he would say he could contact the dead. There was this other guy who says, "I have 50 tapes filled out with recordings of the dead. Mail me to receive them," and stuff like that. It was a very vibrant scene. And like I think whether these people were quote unquote right or not is beside the point. It was a haven for eccentrics and like interesting people. But with this Bilinmeyen magazine crowd, they also had this big side tangent in jinn folklore, which are these beings described in the Quran, and it's like a part of traditional belief. Like, for example, if you live in the country and if you're like more than a little religious, then for you, jinn are as natural as cats or dogs. In fact, like one of my friends, they had this like lady who came to their house to clean. Basically, she was like the housemaid almost, and she was like she had emigrated to Istanbul from one of the provinces. And one day I was over at my friend's, and the lady was cleaning, and then the phone rang, and it turned out like her daughter can't find the pillowcases or something. It was like something very mundane. But I will never forget, like, she said, "Did you look under the bed? Ah, it's not there. Okay. Did you check with your father? He doesn't know." Then I think the jinns took him. And it was just like so matter of fact for them, you know?
that's a
That's,
pretty strong belief then.
yeah. I mean, for them, it's like, it's not something that Western audiences or even like Western educated Turks like myself can comprehend. It's like something beyond belief. It's just, it just is, you know? And that thing, you know, we kind of used to make fun of it back then, but I can look at it now and like kind of see like the whole folk magic approach to it. But of course, this bilinmeyen crowd, at one point, it really kind of bled over imperceptibly into like actual fundamentalist cults and stuff. And there also was an area which I could find no common understanding. And some of these cults also like had like genuine political aims, which I will not go into in this program. But so it was a weird scene, you know. It was a weird scene, which it was kind of like the States if you looked at it. In that respect, you do have the parallelism with the States, where I think, like in the 1990s, a lot of people from this Reagan era satanic panic or the moral majority,
Mm.
they some of them transitioned into this like Fortean interests, let me say. And then in the 2000s, some of those people also bled over into like flat earth people who kind of like morphed into, some of them morphed into QAnon and stuff like that. So, you know, like when you're talking about extraneous bodies of knowledge, there are bridges between all these islands, let's say. And some islands you want to be in, some islands, maybe you don't want to spend your vacations there.
Not
Let me
so
just say
much.
that much. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating too because I see a lot of these different types of things. We talked about on your show when I commented, Kalina had asked a question what you knew about the
Mhm,
Tartarian thing, and
mhm,
you talked well about that and
mhm,
about that energy. But I did notice also a parallel between flat Earth groups and even at some smaller level QAnon groups who
mhm,
really invest a lot of energy in there. It's weird to see how all these groups of people with multiple beliefs, like channeling is obviously one of those weird little groups, and as much as our group has interest in other things, a lot of people only do channeling, only do spirit consciousness type deals, and
mhm,
that's what they're locked in. But I've noticed a lot of people from that community have gone to the Tartarian communities and flat earth communities and
mhm.
everything. So I just wonder, psychologically, what do you feel happens when someone gets into so many different communities that they all just kind of blur a line, like nothing that seems based in reality to most people is even within their care or understanding? Do you think that that's too much magic? Do you think that's okay? Do you think that you probably should invest some energy into being more grounded about subjects?
Well, I think on a personal level, eh, look, I mean, it's okay. Like unless you count some like really like violent extremists, none of these fringe modalities, let us say, none of them has done even like 100th the damage that things like corporate personhood have done to United States or to the world. There are far bigger evils out there. So I think it's like kind of pesky to like when some like of these skeptical people go out and say like, oh, we're the and like, I think like, look, a wrong path when you see it and everybody sees a kind of different picture. I think like the real meat and bones of this whole matter is just like the ability, just like you and I are doing right now, to be able to look at these in terms of theories of knowledge. And in that respect, for example, I have also sometimes said that this Tartarian belief, sometimes it really bleeds into like anti-Semitic theories, but sometimes, it can make a soccer mom or like this like somebody who would otherwise have a really like humdrum existence, sometimes it can make them go out there and notice interesting architecture. And same thing with the flat earth thing. I mean, like, okay, a lot of those guys like became QAnoners, but then like some of the real adamant flat earthers became like convicted that they could experimentally prove this. They did the experiments and then they discovered an interest in physics. And they also, some of them realized that, oh boy, I was wrong. It's not flat. But you know what? I did the experiment and I proved this. So in that way, there's a great silver lining. I think even in like the Tartarian mythos, there is this thing. This thing is present. It can make this like, and you also have to like factor in like the this is in terms of the United States mostly, but what types of places are your cities or towns becoming? What prospects are there? Maybe for people of certain races to like mobility, access to urban civic amenities. These are all acute problems in American societies. So I don't think anyone should be surprised when like people start being nostalgic for humane architecture and beautiful architecture perhaps in a harsh way, but don't be surprised that this is coming out. And this is what I'm always saying, like Tartarian folklore, it has its damages, but it could make somebody living in the projects curious about architecture and the whole phenomenon which they call like remystification of the past. I mean, there are things like, so in great parts of the US, places like Pennsylvania and like parts of Ohio, a lot of present day forests used to be farmlands in up until the 1890s or something. And then, of course, the forests grow fast, and they look like they have been virgin forests for thousands of years. People go into the forest, they discover this circular pit, almost looks like a ritual place. Human, what was this for? Human sacrifice. Turns out, actually, it's like the like lead casting pit from an old farmstead or whatever, but it's remained there. So in the US, you have this remystification of the past operating in tandem with the life crushing banality of contemporary urbanism. So, I mean, at least I can see where these things are coming from. And likewise, different causes for different parts of the world. For example, in our country right now, in Turkey, there are a lot of people who used to be far more religiously conservative, but then they have left this fold. Maybe their parents were like very strict Muslim, but then these people have a more like, they're like lapsed Catholics. But these people still need a kind of spiritual outlet. So there's this like resurgent Gen Z belief in like extraterrestrials or other Fortean subjects. Maybe comes from a need to believe. And like, to reiterate my point, you have to look at these in terms of theories of knowledge. Like, I don't think you can ever talk a single person into or out of anything, but just listen. I think that's always a very valuable thing.
I love that. And I think you're right too. I think as bad as people think a lot of these beliefs can be, like, oh, you're just disassociating from reality, or oh, you're not using your mind, it does inspire those parts of the people. And I think you're right too. Listening is something we haven't done, and we talked about this quite a bit on the last episode, how my whole thing through the pandemic was, you guys over here are in fear for your safety, and over here you're in fear for your freedom.
Mhm.
And that's what's causing this huge desire to fight with each other. And instead, listen to why this person's afraid of dying. Listen to why this person's afraid of not being of being locked in their house for a year and not being able to express their freedoms and things.
Mhm.
And then we don't have to fight. And all the rest, politicians use their ability to get their side lined up with the politics so that they can get more people in. It was really bad. And a lot of corporations and our government especially used those arguments as a tool to divide more people. And why are we dividing when we need to come together? Now, I hate to
Mhm.
do this. We had to have a hard line on today's time because I've got a interview
It's okay.
coming in just a little bit. So I want to give you the rest of this opportunity. We didn't do the lightning round. We didn't do the intro question because we did those on the last shows. But I do want people to know how to get a hold of you. And I will
Mhm.
say the links will be in the description by the time it goes live on. Actually, they're already in the description.
Yeah.
And I highly, highly suggest CM Kosemen's YouTube channel and Patreon too. So go ahead and share. How do people find you? How do people get a hold of you? How do people check out your work?
Okay, so if you go to cmkosemen.com, everything is there, including Patreon. Now, one cool thing about my Patreon is that there's a continuous questions thread there. So if you find my pickings of my mind interesting and want to ask me more questions, you can support me on Patreon and go to the open question time thread there and just write all and any questions you want, and I answer them consecutively in a long and never-ending stream of videos. So in that respect, I invite everyone to go to patreon.com/cm Charlie Mike Kosemen. It sounds like that thing. That's just how it's spelled. CM Kosemen. And I'm on Patreon, YouTube, and my website, cmkosemen.com, which is basically a hub for everything else. And just thank you so much for this chance once again. It was great to speak to you again, Rob.
Oh,
I can't
brother.
I can't tell you how, like, I mean, to me it's like chatting to a friend. I don't feel like I'm on a show at all. And thank you for this opportunity, and thanks to you and all your viewers for their time.
Brother, I really appreciate you being here too. I could talk to you for hours and hours on end. I love you. I think you're amazing, and maybe one day I'll talk you into coming back, and maybe one day you might want to talk to my ET friends and ask them some questions. I think that would be very interesting.
I would love to do this. Let us talk behind the scenes, and like I would love to be part of that experience.
Oh, that would be amazing. All right, brother. Well, thank you for being here. I want to thank all of you guys too for being here. Even though I'm in Sedona hanging out with the ETs, I'm appreciative of you guys being here. And go check out CM Kosemen's work. I am extremely invested in his work, and I feel like there's not enough of it to go around the world, and all the things that he's got going on. You could spend hours and hours and hours just diving through the material and never get bored. So thank you, brother.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All righty.
Have a great night, brother. And all of you guys, we'll see you next week. Actually, you'll see David Chase next week, and the week after, we'll be back live. Guest to be announced. Love you guys, and we'll see you on the other side. Good night,
Ciao.
everybody.